Hello, welcome to a demonstration on the 5 methods to create a pivot chart. Right, so there are 5 methods that I'm going to demonstrate here. The first one is to create a pivot chart from a pivot table, followed by creating a pivot chart from a charts group, right, where there are actually 2 alternative methods that can actually be used, but they all serve exactly the same purpose. And then the third method would be to create a pivot chart from recommended charts under charts group. And then we'll move on to create a pivot chart using a quick analysis tool. And then we conclude by looking at pivot chart using the analyze data function. So many methods of creating a pivot chart. So before further ado, we begin with the first one. I want to create a pivot chart from a pivot table. So as the title suggests, we need to have a pivot table in order for us to create a pivot chart in this particular method. So again, we go and quickly create a pivot table. So what I'm going to do here, I am going to make sure that the pivot table looks exactly the same way for all the 5 methods. Then that way you'll be able to see that we've actually been able to go back to exactly the same output using different methods. So in this particular case, I'm going to be putting the sales month as my row, and the customer state is going to be my filter, and the channel is going to be my column, and the sales amount is going to be my values, right? So basically that's the method I'll be using, right? As you can see here that the chart, rather the pivot table looks this way, and then I'll be able to generate a chart using this. Now while I'm here, you can see there's an option under tools called pivot chart, right? So I just click on it and select the column chart, and go ahead and say OK, and before you know it, you've actually generated the pivot chart. Right, so for all the 5 examples, I'll ensure that I'll be able to come back to exactly the same thing, right? So I'll make sure that the customization is going to look exactly the same way, so that you can actually appreciate that we are able to arrive at the same result by using different methods, right? But now again, this was my first demonstration here, but I'm not going to keep it because I just want to continue to use the same data set over and over again. So again, we've been able to see how we are actually able to create a pivot chart using a pivot table. We're to create a pivot table first. Now the second method is to create a pivot chart from charts group, right? So what does this mean? We have to be under insert tab on our ribbon, and when we are here, we can actually look under charts group here, and we can see there's actually an option called pivot chart. When I click on it, there are actually 2 methods, pivot chart and pivot table, right? So you can see here we're actually going to explore both options so that we can actually see what they actually do. As I've already assured you, they all perform exactly the same task with slight variations. Again, I'll be able to highlight those. So we begin with pivot chart. We click on it and select the data set as expected. Then we go ahead and say OK. And you can see here it's simply opening up the pivot chart fields so that we can actually generate the chart itself. You can see the chart is actually going to show up here, and the pivot table is going to show right there. Right, so you can see the location is everything here. It's very important to pay attention to this, that the location of the pivot chart relative to the pivot table is going to be quite different with the other method. So again, we go ahead and say sales month is going to be our category, which is our row, and of course our filter is going to be customer state, and the channel is going to be our series there, and of course we need amounts to complete that. Now here you can see that the chart is kind of blocking the pivot table because it's the primary thing under this particular method. We are focusing more on the chart itself. But of course, once you've actually created it, you can actually move it out of the way so that we can see all the data that's actually being used to generate this particular chart. But again, you can see that it's exactly the same result as we generated using the first method. Okay, so again, once we're done with this demonstration, we can delete that because we don't need it anymore. So now the other method, or the other option under the same method here, is to use the pivot chart and pivot table, right? So again, we are still generating a pivot chart from charts group, right, which is here. So I click on the second one, pivot chart and pivot table, and okay. And then again, here you can see the location of the pivot chart relative to the location of the pivot table. You see, unlike the previous one, this was very close there, but here it's actually moved away because we want to highlight both the pivot chart and the pivot table. That's why they are actually specified in the instruction. So again, as usual, we go ahead. Sales month is going to be our category, state is going to be our filter, channel is going to be our series, and of course we need the amount, the sales amount there. And before you know it, the pivot chart is actually being generated far away from the pivot table so that we can have a clear visual experience of both of them. So that's the only difference. Otherwise, it's exactly the same result, right? The chart will be exactly the same and the pivot table will be exactly the same, right? So again, do not be confused when you actually see the two of them and you wonder why it's only on the presentation of the two, the pivot table as well as the chart itself. Right, so that's the other option under that particular method. Now the third method is create a pivot chart from recommended charts under charts group. Right, so again we go to insert, and under charts group you see this says there's an option that says recommended charts. You click on it, right? Unlike the other ones where we would actually see a pivot table being prompted, it does not do that right away. But it does show you that the first three charts are the regular charts that you're likely to do in Excel anytime. But the third and fourth one, you see they've got this symbol here, which means that they can actually activate a pivot table and pivot chart. So we select that third, that's the fourth one, and go ahead and say okay. You can see it opens up a pivot chart fields option here. So which means that what we're actually looking at here, this is actually a pivot table and this is actually a pivot chart. So we can now go ahead and put this, just customize. Sales month should be here, the channel should be over there, and customer state should be as our filter. And before you know it, it is actually generating exactly the same result. And we can see we've got our pivot table here and we do have our pivot chart right there. Right, okay, so again, we don't need this anymore, right? And so we used recommended charts. Now the fourth one is to create a pivot chart using a quick analysis tool. Now this one is not widely used by many people, right? Okay, so you can, one method is to just select the data. When you select the data, let me see here. When you select it, it should give you this icon. When you hover your pointer on it, it says quick analysis, right? And it does suggest to you that you could also use a control Q as an alternative way of activating the quick analysis tool. But otherwise, in this case, we want to click on the icon itself, and then it opens up a number of options for us, right? It does show us that we can create charts using this. So we click on charts, and when we do that, we can see here it's actually showing us that there are some charts that are being suggested to us clustered. I can click on this one here, and before you know it is actually activated Again, once again, a pivot table, and we've got the pivot chart fields here. As long as we've got that, we should be able to customize these as we have done before the previous ones. Channel over there, and customer state should be our filter, and before we know it, we've actually generated the chart, the pivot chart once again, right? So what is key is that using all those methods, you find somehow they actually activate the pivot table as well as the pivot chart, and of course gives us the opportunity to use the pivot chart fields to do the customization so that our final output is going to be exactly the same. All right, so here we should be moving on to the final method. After the pivot chart, use the quick analysis tool. We can now move on to create a pivot chart using the analyzed data. Now this can be a little bit different because it depends on the version of Microsoft Office application you have. It may not show up, or it can show up as something else, right? So this analyzed data, if we click on it, it suggests to us what we can actually create. So here we can see that there is a suggestion to insert pivot table, right? So I can click on that, but because this particular pivot table does not look like the one that I actually want, right, I can actually right click on it, and I can change the chart type, and I want it to be a column. I want it to be this one here. Okay, and you can see already it's actually showing me the pivot chart fields there, and it's also showing me the pivot table right there. And then all I have to do is just do the final customization. I want the salesman to be here, I want the customer state to be my filter, and before you know it, we've actually generated exactly the same pivot chart using the same data. All right, otherwise that's all. Those are the 5 methods, right? So one may say, why having so many methods? That's the cool thing about Excel, and in some cases you almost say it's actually a blessing that there's so much functionality, and it can as well be a curse, right? Because then there's so much more you can do in Excel than you can ever imagine. And because of so much functionality that's actually available within it, at times it can be confusing as well, right? But again, you can explore all these 5 methods and see which one feels much more comfortable to you, the one that you feel like will work much better for you. So you can happen to be in one particular area of Excel and you're still able to accomplish the same objectives. You don't necessarily have to go to one place in order to accomplish all those types of objectives. Otherwise, that's all I have for you. Thank you so much for watching. And again, as usual, like, share, and be sure to subscribe. And of course, provide some feedback to me so that I can understand what you're actually learning from these demonstrations, so that I can continue to make some modifications for you. Thank you so much, and bye for now.